The house I grew up in had a basement that always felt older than the rest of the place. The upstairs had been renovated sometime in the early 2000s. New floors, fresh paint, updated appliances. But the basement looked like it had been frozen in time since the 70s. Wood panel walls, exposed pipes, and that constant damp smell that never really went away. In the corner of the laundry room sat an old wooden desk. It was already there when my parents bought the house. The previous owners had left a bunch of junk behind, and for whatever reason my dad decided to keep the desk instead of throwing it out. For years it just sat there, holding random things. Loose screws, batteries, old phone chargers. All the drawers opened except one. The bottom drawer on the right side was locked. We never had the key. When I was younger, I asked my dad about it once. He shrugged and said, "Probably paperwork from the last owner. Nothing interesting." But the thing about locked things is they make you curious, especially when you're a kid. By the time I was 14, that drawer had been bothering me for years. Every time I went down to the basement to grab laundry, detergent, or a tool, I'd see that little keyhole staring back at me. One Saturday afternoon when my parents were out grocery shopping, I decided I was finally going to open it. I grabbed a screwdriver from the workbench and knelt down next to the desk. The wood around the drawer was old and slightly warped. After a few minutes of prying, the lock gave way with a loud crack, and the drawer slid open about 2 inches. Dust drifted out. I pulled it the rest of the way open. Inside were dozens of envelopes, at least 30 of them, maybe more. They were arranged in neat stacks, all facing the same direction. Each envelope had a date written on the front in black pen. The earliest one I saw was from 1998. Curious, I grabbed the top envelope and opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of our house. The photo had clearly been taken from across the street. The entire front yard and porch were visible. At first, it didn't seem creepy, just an ordinary picture of a house. Then I noticed something. There was a circle drawn in pen near one of the upstairs windows. Inside the circle was a shadow. It looked like someone standing behind the curtain. I turned the photo over, expecting some explanation written on the back. Nothing, just the date. I opened another envelope. Same thing. Another photo of the house, taken from almost the exact same angle. But this time, the circle was around something else. A shape near the tree in the front yard. It looked like someone partially hidden behind the trunk. I started going through more of them. Every envelope had a photograph of the house. Every photograph had something circled. Sometimes it was a dark shape near a window. Sometimes something in the bushes near the driveway. The photos continued year after year. The house slowly changed in small ways. The old owner's car disappeared from the driveway. The front door was repainted. New plants showed up along the walkway. Eventually, around the mid-2000s photos, the house looked exactly like I remembered it when we moved in. Which meant the person taking these photos had continued long after the previous owners left. I started feeling this weird knot forming in my stomach. Why would someone keep photographing the same house for over a decade? And why were they circling things in the pictures? I kept opening envelopes. As the dates got more recent, the circles started moving closer to the house. Earlier photos had circles near the trees or the sidewalk. Later ones were closer to the porch, closer to the windows. One photo had a circle drawn around the mailbox, another around the front steps. By the time I reached the last envelope in the stack, my hands were shaking a little. The date on it was from the year before we moved into the house. I opened it slowly. The picture inside was the clearest one yet, taken from the same spot across the street. But this time, the circle wasn't around a shadow or a tree. It was around a person standing on the front porch. The person was facing the front door. Their back was toward the camera. They were wearing a dark hoodie. The hood was up, so you couldn't see their head clearly, just their shoulders and back. They looked like they were about to knock. I stared at the photo for a long time. Something about it made my skin crawl. It didn't look like a random moment someone happened to capture. It looked deliberate, like the photographer had been waiting for that exact moment. I flipped the photo over. Just the date, nothing else. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. The photo was taken before my family moved in, which meant whoever was standing on the porch wasn't there to see us. They were there for the previous owners. I shoved the photos back into the envelopes and closed the drawer as best I could. For some reason, I didn't tell my parents about it right away. I think part of me was embarrassed for breaking the drawer open. A few weeks later, though, I finally mentioned it to my dad. He went down to the basement with me to look at them. When he opened the drawer and saw the envelopes, his reaction was different than mine. He didn't look confused. He looked uneasy. He went through a few photos silently before closing the drawer again. "Probably some paranoid neighbor," he said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. He told me to leave the drawer alone after that. We ended up moving out of that house about 2 years later. The desk stayed behind in the basement. My parents didn't want to bother moving it. A few months after we moved, I got curious and checked the house listing online to see if anyone had bought it yet. Someone had. There were new photos of the property, fresh paint, different furniture. Everything looked normal, except for one thing I noticed in the listing pictures. In the shot of the front yard, taken from the street, there was a person standing near the mailbox, facing the house. And even though the real estate photo was taken from far away, I swear it looked like they were wearing a dark hoodie, just like the person in the last photo from that drawer. When I was 12, my parents decided to renovate parts of our house before putting it on the market. We had lived there for about 6 years, and my dad wanted to fix a few things before listing it. New paint, updated flooring, and repairing what he thought was water damage in my bedroom closet. My closet was small, just wide enough for hanging clothes and a couple of shelves. For months, we'd noticed a dark stain forming along the back wall. My dad assumed a pipe had leaked at some point. One Saturday morning, he emptied the closet and started cutting into the drywall. I was sitting on my bed, watching him work, when he hit something solid. It wasn't a pipe. He knocked again with the back of the hammer and frowned. "That's weird," he said. Instead of insulation behind the drywall, there was wood. Flat wooden planks running vertically. My dad pulled a section of drywall away, exposing more of it. At first, we thought it might be some kind of structural paneling, but then we noticed the outline. There was a seam in the shape of a door. The weird part was that it didn't have a knob, just a thin indentation where a handle might have been at one point. My mom came upstairs when she heard us talking. The three of us stood there staring at it for a while. None of us had any idea it was there. My dad grabbed a screwdriver and wedged it into the seam. After a few minutes of prying, the panel shifted slightly and popped open. Behind it was a small hidden space. Not a full room, more like a narrow compartment built between the walls. Maybe 4 feet wide and about 6 feet deep. The ceiling was low and the walls were unfinished wood. There were no windows, no lights, just a single metal folding chair sitting in the middle. I remember the air smelled stale, like dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. My mom immediately said it was creepy. and told my dad to close it back up. But my dad stepped inside to look around. That's when he noticed the box. It was tucked into the far corner behind the chair. A plain cardboard box, taped shut. He pulled it out and brought it into my room. When he opened it, we found a stack of old VHS tapes. At least 20 of them. Each tape had a piece of white masking tape on it, with writing in black marker. Every label said the same thing. Bedroom. Underneath that was a date. The earliest one was from 2001. We moved into the house in 2008. At first, we assumed the tapes belonged to whoever lived there before us. Maybe someone had used the space as storage and forgotten about it. Still, the labels were strange. Why would someone label a tape just bedroom? My dad shrugged and said we might as well see what was on them before throwing them out. We still had an old VHS player in the basement hooked up to a small TV. He grabbed the earliest tape and slid it in. The screen flickered with static before the picture appeared. It took a moment for my brain to process what I was looking at. The camera was pointed at a bedroom, a familiar bedroom, my bedroom, but it looked different. Different carpet, different furniture. The bed was in another position. It clearly wasn't from when we lived there. Must be the previous owners, my dad said. The video showed the room from a high angle, like the camera had been mounted near the ceiling. Nothing really happened in the recording. The room just sat there for hours while sunlight moved across the floor. Eventually, someone walked into frame. A woman who definitely wasn't my mom. She folded laundry on the bed. That confirmed it. It was the family who lived there before us. My dad fast-forwarded the tape for a while, and then shut it off. Probably a security camera thing, he said. It seemed weird, but not terrifying. Just someone recording a room for some reason. Then my dad grabbed another tape. This one was dated 2009. 2 years after we moved in, he slid it into the player. The picture appeared again. Same camera angle, same room. But this time, the room looked exactly like mine. My bed, my posters, my desk. I felt this sudden chill run through my body. We watched in silence. The footage showed my room late at night. The only light was my small desk lamp. And then, about 10 minutes into the tape, the bedroom door opened. A smaller version of me walked inside. I watched myself on that screen climb into bed. None of us said anything for a long time. My mom finally broke the silence. Where would that camera even be? We all looked at each other. The angle was coming from above, near the closet. We went upstairs immediately. My dad grabbed a flashlight and climbed back into the hidden space behind the closet wall. After about 30 seconds, he said something I'll never forget. "There's wiring back here." He pushed the flashlight toward the ceiling. In the corner of the hidden compartment was a small hole drilled through the wood. Barely noticeable. But from the angle, it pointed directly into my bedroom, right toward my bed. There was a metal bracket attached near the hole, like something had once been mounted there. Something small, like a camera. My mom told my dad to call the police. They came about 40 minutes later. The officer who looked at the tapes took them with him and said they'd investigate. But there wasn't much they could do without knowing who installed it. The previous homeowner had moved out of state years earlier. We never got any real answers. But a few weeks later, when my parents were packing things to move out, my dad found something else in that hidden space. Another tape. It had fallen behind one of the boards and wasn't in the box with the others. This one didn't have a date, just one word written on it. Testing. My dad never played it. He threw it away. But sometimes I still think about that camera angle and the fact that the tapes continued for years after we moved in, which means someone had to go back into that hidden room more than once to change them. When I was a kid, my parents had one rule about the house that they were unusually strict about. Don't go into the attic. It wasn't presented like a creepy mystery or anything dramatic. My dad always explained it the same way. The ladder's old and the floorboards up there aren't safe. That was it. As a kid, I believed him. The attic entrance was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling, and I barely thought about it for years. But the older I got, the more curious I became. When you're a kid and something is completely off limits, it eventually starts to feel less like a safety rule and more like a secret. By the time I was 15, curiosity finally won. It was the middle of summer. My parents were both at work, and I was home alone. The house was quiet, and I kept glancing up at the attic hatch in the hallway. Eventually, I grabbed a chair and pulled the cord. The ladder unfolded with a loud creak. Dust fell from the ceiling as it came down. I hesitated for a moment, half expecting my parents to somehow magically appear and catch me. When nothing happened, I grabbed my phone for the flashlight and started climbing. The attic air felt different the moment I stuck my head through the opening. Hot, stale. The kind of air that had been sitting still for years. My flashlight beam swept across the space. The attic was bigger than I expected, but it was mostly empty. Just wooden beams, insulation, and a few cardboard boxes scattered around. Nothing about it seemed dangerous, which made me wonder why my parents had been so adamant about staying out of it. I climbed the rest of the way up and stepped onto the boards carefully. They creaked, but held my weight. Most of the boxes looked like old storage. Holiday decorations, photo albums, random junk. But one thing caught my attention near the far wall. An old wooden trunk. It looked older than everything else up there. Dark wood with metal corners, like something you'd see in an antique store. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked over and lifted the lid. Inside, there were only a few things. Some old blankets, a rusted flashlight, and a spiral notebook. The notebook was worn, the cover slightly bent from age. It didn't look particularly special. I opened it. The first page was filled with handwriting. Neat, careful, almost obsessive. At the top of the page was a date. March 12th. No year. Underneath that were short sentences written like observations. Father leaves for work at 7:12 a.m. Mother leaves at 8:03. Boy stays home today. Sick. I frowned. At first I assumed it was just some kind of journal from the previous owners. But when I turned the page, I noticed the entries continued. Each page had a new date. Each entry described small, ordinary things happening inside the house. Boy plays video games in living room for 2 hours. Mother talks on phone in kitchen around 9:40. Father returns home early today. The more I read, the more uncomfortable I felt. The entries weren't written like someone describing their own day. They were written like someone watching, observing, documenting. I flipped ahead a few pages. More of the same. Day after day. Detailed notes about daily routines. When people left the house, what rooms they spent time in, even arguments. One entry said, parents arguing loudly in kitchens tonight. Boy upstairs, does not hear. I felt a strange chill run through me. I recognized the event. My parents had a huge fight one night when I was about 9. I had been upstairs playing games with headphones on. That moment was written in the notebook, which meant whoever wrote it had been inside the house. or very close to it. I kept flipping pages. The dates went back years. Eventually, I found an entry that made my stomach drop. They are bringing the baby home today. That was the day I was born. The notebook didn't stop there. There were entries describing me growing up. Boy learning to walk. Boy watching cartoons before school. Boy crying tonight after nightmare. My hands were starting to shake. This wasn't the previous owners. This was my family. Every page felt like a violation. Someone had been watching us for years. Then I reached the final pages. The handwriting started to look different. Messier. Rushed. The entries were shorter. Parents discussing renovations upstairs. My chest tightened. The next page said, "They are planning to redo the attic." Another entry followed. "Need to move soon." The date written next to it was 2 days before my parents bought the house. That didn't make sense. We moved in after the previous owners left. Whoever wrote this shouldn't have been here when my family arrived. I flipped to the last page. There was only one sentence written there. The ink looked darker, like it had been written later. The line said, "They have a son now." My breath caught in my throat. That sentence was written after the earlier entries ended, which meant someone had come back to the notebook after we moved in. I suddenly became very aware of how quiet the attic was. The heat, the stale air, the creaking boards beneath my feet. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Near the back wall of the attic was a narrow opening between the beams, a dark space that looked like it continued further into the house, almost like a crawl space. And inside that darkness, I saw something shift, just slightly, like someone pulling back deeper into the shadows. I didn't wait to investigate. I dropped the notebook and ran. I practically fell down the ladder getting out of the attic. I slammed the hatch shut and pushed the chair away, like that would somehow keep something from coming down after me. When my parents got home, I told them everything. My dad went up into the attic to look. He came down a few minutes later holding the notebook, but he said the crawl space was empty. We moved out of that house about 6 months later. My parents never talked about the notebook again, but I still think about that last sentence and the fact that the handwriting was different from the rest, like someone else had added it, someone who had come back.